For all of us who are involved in education, this week is when they may as well drain the pool, roll up all the beaches. We are back in the classroom, and as my daughter always said of this month of the year, life as we have known it is now over. But if you're a college student, there is at least one bit of good news, and that is that this Congress that has not been able to do much, but with a lot of pressure from the White House, has been able to pass a bill lowering interest rates on federally insured student loans. It was an amazingly hard fought for decision, though. There was considerable political pressure to double interest rates on student loans under the banner of fiscal responsibility. Republicans complained that it was costing the government too much money. Never one to sit in the back of math class, my new heartthrob, Elizabeth Warren, fired back that the government was making $51 billion a year of profit on student loans. Not that it is likely that any members of Congress actually believed their own rhetoric. They had a larger reason for wanting to continue to make higher education more and more unavailable to the public. Conservative politics depends for its future on an unquestioning, compliant, and uneducated population. Not that I want to make too fine of a point of it here, but how many of you were encouraged by the pastor that you grew up under to take a college class in religion or in Bible? The priest and the preacher, along with the politician and the captains of corporate industry, prefer an uninformed public because an uninformed public is easier to manipulate. And if you look at our judicial system, I don't think we have any attorneys here today. It's another good day at Community Christian Church. If you look at the process of voir dire in the court system in which attorneys are able to question potential jurors, and you look, if there was actually a study of how many college-educated people ever get to sit on a jury, that the process of voir dire is a search for the most uninformed and the most gullible people that they can possibly find, which I don't want to be diminishing of the people that actually serve our judicial system as jurors. But you look at that Trayvon Martin decision and you think, was that an informed decision? Was that a decision rendered through analytical thought, critical thinking? No, of course not. You find the most impressionable, gullible, manipulative people that are vulnerable to manipulation as possible, and you put them on juries. And that, unfortunately, is how our judicial system is run. Now, you may think it's unnecessarily cynical of me, but let me go to the lowest common denominator to make my point. And you know, by the lowest common denominator, I can only be referring to the diva of talk radio, Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, who first tumbled from grace being fired at CNN, was later found by Fox News to be too crazy for them to keep on the air. But still, he has landed as a radio talk show host, and he, according to Forbes magazine, last year made $80 million. Buy gold? I don't... It can only prove that old adage that there's a sucker born every minute, that there is a huge entertainment demand for paranoia and fear and white rage, that he is making himself fabulously wealthy on the strength of uttering the most ridiculous and absurd forms of racist and paranoid beliefs. A couple of days ago, he referred to Oprah Winfrey as being disgusting. And I've never been much of an Oprah fan myself, but not since The Color Purple anyway. But even I know that there are certain people that it's not even safe to criticize. But But recently, Beck was on a tear about higher education, vowing to his audience that he would never send another child to be indoctrinated in a university. He would prefer, he insisted, that his children just be auto mechanics, even bad auto mechanics working at the gas station down the street where nobody goes, to ever allowing them to be tainted by higher education. Now, there's two things about that. Obviously, nothing puts distance between Glenn Beck and any other person, whether it's a listener or one of his own children, as much as being exposed to information and facts. But the larger issue is that the whole thing is a ruse. Beck is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His kids will never have to work anywhere, nor will his grandchildren or his great-grandchildren. On the strength of a very gullible audience, the Beck family has crossed the Rubicon that you and I will never see. They are now a part of the wealthy aristocracy, and his heirs, unless something goes bad wrong, buy too much gold or something, they will never work again. So what he is really saying is not that he is willing to see his kids working as an inept, uneducated mechanic leading an impoverished and unfulfilled life. What he is saying is that he's willing to see your children and your grandchildren working at a menial, unfulfilling job for the rest of their lives. A retired friend of mine told me that he planned to audit one of my religion classes at Drury University, but when he found out what it was going to cost him, he decided that I couldn't possibly know anything that would be worth that much money. The rise in the cost of higher education, even in state universities, is rising so fast that it is becoming entirely out of the reach of more and more people. Now, when the Great Depression, followed by World War II, had brought our nation to its knees, the government went to great lengths to make university education accessible to anyone who had the discipline and the intelligence to go get it. I started college nearly 40 years ago now, and the tuition at that time for a 4-year state university degree did not cost as much as the tuition to take one class under me at Drury University. More importantly, it was possible for me as a 17-year-old to get a part-time entry-level job and earn enough money to live, pay tuition, buy books, and go to school. And before I finished graduate school, I was having to actually send money to my parents who were facing economic difficulties. Now, that kind of scenario where someone can work their way through college, not that my daughter tried, but it virtually cannot be done. Entry-level salaries, buying power has gone down, and the cost of a university education has gone up. Even in graduate school, and I went to the most expensive graduate school in the world at the time. It was more expensive to go to Vanderbilt than any other school in the world. They didn't put that in their literature when I applied there, but it turned out to be objectively true. I left that university with a great deal of student debt. But at that time, interest rates were capped, and I was able to pay that debt off in 9 years. The average now is that a student has to work for 19 years to pay off their student loans for an undergraduate degree. And people that go on and get 2 and 3 degrees will end up with a debt where their loan payment is higher than their house payment. An indentured servant, virtual slavery in the beginning of our country, was for 7 years. That you had to work for 7 years to earn the right to come to the United States. What we're doing to our students now is more severe by nearly 3 times than indentured servanthood. That's tough. Not very many years ago, there were states that made sure that there was no tuition charge for their state residents because it is good for the economy It's good for advances in technology. It's good for government. It's good for the environment. It's even good, God forbid, for the military, for our population to be better educated. The only thing that education is bad for is conservative politics and traditional religion. Elie Wiesel said that education is good for the soul as well as being good for the mind. Questions afford their own path to purify the soul. I remember hearing Scott Peck say that anything that cannot be questioned is an idol, and all idols are slated for destruction. Anything that you cannot challenge, that you cannot question, that you cannot analyze, that you are told to accept on the face of it no matter what, that is an idol, whether that's religion or economics or politics, and all idols are slated for destruction. So we, in the progressive movement, must question everything. We question our own religious tradition and the kind of unquestioning patriotism that we were taught as compliant citizens and obedient warriors. We have to question those values. One of my heroes, Howard Zinn, said that civil disobedience is not our problem in America. Our problem is civil obedience. He says, our problem is that numbers of people all over the world have obeyed the dictates of their leaders of their government and have gone to war, and millions have been killed because of obedience. Our problem is that people are obedient all over the world in the face of poverty and starvation and stupidity and war and cruelty. Our problem is that people are obedient while the jails are full of petty thieves, and all the while the grand thieves are running the country. That's our problem. Yeah. Howard Zinn's dead now, but on his behalf, I appreciate your applause. Some of you saints have actually suffered through reading my book that was a rewrite of my doctoral dissertation. And though I would not recommend that book to anyone, no one should have to suffer through that book. Still, the topic, I think, is important. My research was on the spiritual practices of monastic communities. I don't know why it wasn't a million seller. But I really wanted to describe meaningfully the life of a committed spiritual person. What I discovered in my research is that for very many centuries, monastic leaders had understood that the nature of the spiritual journey had three specific stages. The first was purgation, the second was illumination, and the third was the unitive stage. Purgation has to do with making confession, separating yourself from the carnal desires of the world, disciplining yourself to live a life of poverty, self-denial, prayer, and peacefulness. The second stage, called the illuminative or illumination, was about learning, study, about becoming informed, aware of understanding. The third step of a more mystical union in awe of God, it was said, was not possible without the first two. Now, interestingly, in all my research of monastic communities from the 4th century in Alexandria on through the Middle Ages, there was never a point at which any of these great spiritual classics pointed to a particular curriculum. It wasn't that there were certain things that everyone had to know. It was that you were expected to be a scholar. You were expected to be a thinker. You were expected to read, to evaluate, to think critically. But it was not that you had to be a Bible scholar or to read philosophy. They chanted the Psalms every day, just like we do at the beginning of our worship service. It's just part of the air they breathed was that psalm. But also, they sat in what was called the chapter room. Every day before the midday meal, the abbot would read a chapter of their book of order. But during lunch, they ate in silence. Well, not just lunch, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They eat in silence while a lector reads to them from some edifying book. And the community would choose the book that they wanted to be read. Sometimes it's a novel, sometimes it's history, sometimes it's philosophy, and sometimes it's religion. But reading was a part of their daily life. I spent 7 years visiting monasteries, staying for days or weeks at a time, worshiping with them, listening to instruction, studying, and though many of them maintained a religion that I don't personally identify with, they also had a vocabulary that would send you to your dictionary anytime that you got alone. I mean, these were phenomenally well-read, smart people. Those years of my life affected me, and it has influenced how I am now a pastor among you. This little church here on the edge of Springfield, Missouri, has guest lecturers from college professors more than any church I've ever known of any size. We do book studies, we hold conferences, we stay in the literature, because I'm convinced that the only spiritual life that is not entirely self-serving is an informed spiritual life that is evidence-based, that is fact-based. Though being informed is sometimes painful, and sometimes being informed, particularly about world events, can lead to cynicism. I believe that education is the only way out of either political or spiritual tyranny. When I look at what separates us from the way old politics, old religion, and old business runs the world, I have in my mind a metaphor on farming, that if you asked a farmer if he believed in planting or if he believed in harvest, the farmer would think you were crazy. And you would be crazy. No one can be enthusiastic about harvest if they're not equally invested in planting. You would have to be nuts to plant and not harvest. But I believe our current Congress, our current Supreme Court, our major corporations, and our military-industrial complex look at the world only as a point of harvest. There is not an appreciable interest in planting. They want power, they want money, and they want it now. And if we let them take it all, there will be a very small, permanent ruling class in this nation, surrounded by a class of permanent peasants. We plant by education. Education is what gives us the next generation of inventors, physicians, research scientists, designers, architects, builders, teachers, statesmen, writers. But every time we cut funding to schools, every time we raise tuition in a university, we force students to go deeper into debt to get an education, we are deciding to harvest without planting. And when we do that, the harvest is going to get smaller every year and smaller until the entire world is impoverished by that greed. We began this sermon with a reading of what Elie Wiesel said that he knew for certain, about which he had no doubt. So I'd like to conclude with a bit of the saying. I am certain that a university education should be free to any American who has the ability and the discipline to obtain an education. The interest our government charges students on student loans should not be one bit more than the interest they charge to banks, because the investment we make in students is more vital to our nation's health than anything the banks will ever do for us. And you, my friends, both you who are seated here in this church and those who will view us this week online, you should question everything, everything. Question authority, question the government, question the church, question me. Examine your own closely held beliefs. Think critically and never stop learning. Be informed so that you will understand the world around you and you will understand and appreciate your own heart.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.